Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Imagine for a second that you didn't want to buy a notebook. Not a notebook computer, just a normal notebook that you write with a pen. Well, I didn't. Like you, I have quite a few notebooks just lying around, and I also have a lot of paper. And let's not forget that I can take notes on my computer and on the iPad. In short, who really needs a notebook? Well, there's this company called Studio Neat, and they create all these little devices and little gizmos, and now they created a notebook, and they totally ignored this lack of need, and they decided to put out a notebook called a Panobook. You know where the name is coming from, right? It's panoramic. And one look at this Panobook, and you suddenly feel the need for a notebook. And like any product, any service, this notebook has many features, it has many benefits, which is where the root of all uniqueness trouble lies, doesn't it? Whether you set out to write a book or create a course or manufacture a notebook, your offering is going to have many features and many benefits. And marketing tells us repeatedly that we need to create a factor of uniqueness, because it's the uniqueness that makes a product or a service stand out. But how do we create uniqueness? And how do we create it so that it can't easily be ripped off? For this, we have to start looking at the features and the benefits of the product. In this case, it's the Panobook. So let's look at the features and benefits. There are a list over here, list coming up. The page size is panoramic at 11.34 by 6.30 inches. That's approximately the same size as a small-sized keyboard. It has a subtle dot grid. The grid enables you to draw shapes on a page almost perfectly without the need of a ruler. It has guide markers. These are subtle guide markers. They make it easy for you to draw 3 rectangles on a page, and it's really well-sized for smartphone or UI or storyboarding. Fourth one, you can write on them with many different types of pens without smudging, without bleeding. The fifth is that it's made with robust wire row binding, which allows the notebook to sit flat when opened. But you can also tear out a page if you don't like how it looks. Panobook also comes with a slipcase, which is meant to be the final resting place for your notebook. That sounds pretty creepy, isn't it? But anyway, it's really nice, the whole slipcase, because you can write on the spine and then you can catalog the notebook, which is what I really like. So these are 6 features and benefits, and this means that we have 6 potential uniqueness factors in place. But will these benefits and features assure those creators, the guys who create the book, will they assure it of a high level of success? If it's relatively easy to copy the product or service, a competitor can step in. They can take away your high vantage point. But can we make it a little difficult for those nasty buggers? Let's look and see what's possible. We need to evaluate how difficult it will be for the competition to copy your idea. What's impossible? What's seemingly impossible in your field? If you're dealing with a product or a service, what seems to be the most out of reach for both you and your competition? Many of us have heard about Domino's Pizza, and many of us know of the story of how they came to dominate the pizza industry. Their slogan was 30 minutes or it's free. Now that was a level of difficulty that was almost impossible for the competition to quickly overcome. That same kind of uniqueness seems to be inbuilt into a Tesla car or truck. So the Tesla Roadster quickly put on the brakes on the competition. Because of the range, it can go 400 miles without needing to charge. The long-range trucks can go 500 miles, which means that, at least in the US, a truck can go to their destination and back without needing a single charge. At this point, you're probably thinking, here we go again. This is all very fine for a big company like Domino's and Tesla, but what about you and what about me? Well, a few years ago, we realized that at Psychotactics, our role wasn't necessarily to give the client more information. We noticed that we were able to give them skills instead. You notice what's happening here, right? It immediately ramps up the level of difficulty. But we went ahead anyway. We promised that every course, every workshop wouldn't focus solely on the information, but would focus on skill. That once you finished the cartooning course, you'd have information, but you'd have the skill to cartoon. If you went through the information products course, it wasn't just more information, but it was something where you would create a product that was so good that clients would consume it. They would go from start to finish. You see the difficulty? It seems like a ridiculous claim. It makes it very difficult for you to put these things into place, and you have to think things through, and you have to get a system that will make sure that everything falls in place. But it makes it extremely hard for the competition to follow. However, let's say that you don't want to go out on a limb just now. Most products or services, they tend to be fairly similar. A course, a membership site, a book, a law service, they're all remarkably similar. However, if you reduce the number of components, you can almost always guarantee a specific result. Take, for instance, the headlines report on the homepage of the Psychotactics site. Now, when you sign up for the newsletter, you get the report, but what does that report guarantee? It guarantees that in under 10 minutes, you'll be able to write 3 different types of headlines. Now, that kind of promise isn't hard for the competition to copy, but even so, they might not be in a position to do so right away. When Domino's Pizza made their offer, no one was able to get their pizza across in 30 minutes. Today, all these years later, maybe there is a system. Maybe the competition can deliver that pizza within 30 minutes. Nonetheless, it allowed Domino's to enjoy this huge honeymoon period, even as the competition tried to catch up. And that's if they tried to catch up at all. So here's what I'm saying. I'm saying you're going to work on making something more difficult. That becomes your uniqueness. You might have this objection, well, the competitors will come in, and anyway they will copy it. But you will get this big break, this big honeymoon period, because it's very difficult for the competition to look around and say, hey, they're doing it, let's do it. Because you're not the only competitor. There are so many different competitors. And for them to change all their systems just because you made some crazy uniqueness, which is extremely difficult for them to follow already, and now they have to change their systems. So they just think, okay, these people are crazy. We are already succeeding. We're already doing well. We won't go that way. And you can see this with Airbnb, for instance. I mean, it's not like the hotels didn't know of Airbnb's existence. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited. And Airbnb got a toehold, and then they moved further up. And I wish they just had waited, but it's more than likely that the hotels just thought, these guys are nuts, we're not going to pay attention to them. And when you create that level of difficulty, your uniqueness is so much easier for your clients to understand because nobody else is doing it. Which brings us back to that notebook, that Pano book, and that's an example. It has many benefits, it has many features, but we have to ask, what is the difficulty factor? It's panoramic. It has this extremely useful dot grid. It doesn't smudge, it doesn't bleed. It's got great paper quality. It can sit flat when opened. It has a slipcase. Remember the slipcase where it's final resting place? But where's the difficulty factor? What if the competition decided to copy the very same book? If I were the creator of the book, I would possibly pick the blotting factor. So many of us use different types of pens that you'd want a book that could take almost any pen. Now, I have no problem with the Pano books, and good thing too, because I bought 15 of them. But if you look at the reviews online, people like the books, but they have a problem with smudging. They have the problem when you put that pen on paper and it starts to smudge. And when you're creating something like that, you go, we can't do this. This is too difficult. But that's where it is. That's where the uniqueness lies. That's where the competition finds it extremely hard to copy, because you figured out something, or you have worked very hard to figure out something that is very unique. And this is why the iPod, Apple was really struggling at one point in time. We now look at Apple as one of the most valuable companies in the world, but they struggled. At the point when the iPod came out, they were just teetering on bankruptcy. But someone at Apple figured out, hey, we can put 10,000 songs in one device. And now it seems like nothing. You can put movies and songs and everything on that device. But at that point in time, it was impossible to put so many songs on a device that small. And of course, it was impossible to find anything, so they had this now very antique scroll wheel, which seems even more bizarre. But that's what gave them the attention, because of the difficulty factor. No one could do that. And in your business, there are going to be things that you can't solve right now and your clients can't solve. That's the difficulty factor. That could be your uniqueness. When we created this podcast, we looked at it the same way. We decided to put in all of this music, this rich amount of music. We decided that the podcast wasn't going to be some interview podcast, which pretty much everyone is doing. You just sit there, you get some name. And yes, there are people that do a lot of work. Some of my friends, they put in 6-8 hours of work just to get an interview right. But most people, they just sit there, they just do an interview. And we decided that we're going to write 4,000, 5,000 words for every podcast. We're going to produce it. It's just, me, and there's Joe who does the music. And right at the start, there was no Joe. It was just me. And, putting all that podcast stuff together, putting the music, it took the whole day. But it made it unique. And granted, there are people that don't like the music. They want the podcast without the music, but we're not catering for everybody. Domino's Pizza delivered in 30 minutes, but that didn't mean that the pizza was gourmet pizza. Airbnb's level of difficulty was to get a stranger to enter your own house, and then later on to let them rent your entire house. And that's why we travel by Airbnb. Lots of people, they just rent a space, but when I'm in a hotel room, it's just a waste of time for me, because I wake up so early in the morning and then I can't leave the hotel room. Well, I can, but I end up in the lobby at 5 o'clock and they're trying to set up all the tables for breakfast and I'm just in the way, so then I get on the street. But when we rent the whole house, I can go to the kitchen, I can make some coffee, I can sit down, I can paint, I can read. That's what you call a vacation, not getting stuck in a hotel room on your iPad trying to buy everything off the internet. So yes, we're clear on the level of difficulty. So that's what I need you to do. I need you to look at your product or your service, or the product or the service that you are creating. What are you going to do first? Step 1, you're going to list your product or your service. So you just write the name of your product or your service. Now you know what step 2 is, right? What is very difficult for you to achieve, or for your competition to achieve, or what is seemingly impossible? That's what you have to make a list of. Step 3 is, how do you make it possible? Of course, you might not have the answer today. How do you go about creating blotting-free paper today? No, you can't. It's going to take you 6 months. It's going to take you a year. I don't know. But the point is, you still have to go through the steps. You have the product. What is impossible? How do you make it possible? And that would take care of the first 3 steps. But the 4th step would be, can others easily replicate this uniqueness? So you have to do a bit of analysis. And finally, how do you get the word out? So you want to list this. You don't have to do everything today. You just have to list, how am I going to get the word out? Is it going to be through blogs, through publicity, through advertising, through what am I going to do to get the word out? So let's take an example before we come to the end of this podcast. Let's take the membership site at 5000 BC, for instance. What was step one? We had to name the product. So the name of the product is 5000 BC. And in case you're wondering, it's because psychology hasn't changed in the last 5,000 years. That's why we named it 5000 BC. But anyway, the name of the product is 5000 BC. Step two, and the question is, what is seemingly impossible? What's seemingly impossible in most membership sites is for the owner to be a presence, to be there almost at all times. That's impossible. That's a stupid thing when you think about it. When you start up a membership site, most people say, okay, I'm going to put this membership site and it's a form of leverage. I'm going to put in all the content. Everyone's going to be happy. Bye-bye. And what's seemingly impossible is to have a forum, but not just to have a forum, but to answer all the questions that pop up in the forum. And you'd think, I can't do that. But that takes us to step three, which is how do you make it possible? So I thought about it. How do I answer most of the questions or almost all the questions that have been aimed at me? And the first one was technology-based. If you have a lot of clients, and we have like 600 clients in 5000 BC, well, not everyone asks a question at the same time. But even so, there are many forums and sub-forums. How are you going to know that someone in the Taking Action forum has asked you a question? Well, the way that we solved that problem was the system of tagging, which you see on Facebook. You just put @Sean, and then I get a message, and so I know there's a question. So it was technology-based. But the second thing is, how am I going to answer all of these questions? Or why should I answer all of these questions? And there were two reasons for that. The first is, I'm insanely curious. If you have a problem, I want to know why you have that problem, how to solve that problem. I'm just like a card player. I want to know who's playing the cards, how are they winning, how are they losing, what's happening. So I'm insanely curious, and that really holds me in good stead. But the second thing is that I can then write extensive answers. Like I can write 800 words, 2,000 words, 4,000 words. And it started out with the 800-word article, but now I write 4,000 words or 5,000 words, which is like, 3, 4, 5 pages of answers to a single set of questions. And the reason for that is I can then use it as an article. I can use it as a podcast. I can use it as a vanishing report. What's more interesting is that clients love it when it shows up as a vanishing report, because now there are cartoons, it's formatted differently. It's not exactly the same thing as it appeared in the forum. So it has multiple leverage uses. And so it makes business sense, but it also satisfies my own passion to find out what you're thinking and how to solve that problem, because it then solves my problem. Okay, so I got a little excited there, but let's look at the steps. First, list your product or your service. Then step 2 was what is seemingly impossible. And the step 3 was how do you make it possible? Step 4 is, can others easily replicate this uniqueness? You can tell, right? It's almost impossible. I mean, you can do it, but now you have to have that same card player mentality. You have to have that same mentality of, okay, I'm going to leverage this stuff, which a lot of people do, but it's very hard. And finally, how do you get the word out? And we have this consistency of getting the word out. So we do this through the newsletters, not very often through the newsletters, but often enough, and through this podcast. You've heard of 5000 BC on almost every podcast that you've listened to. It's usually right at the end I talk about how, and I will, even at this end of this podcast, I'll talk about 5000 BC. But notice, I also made it an example. So you've heard 5000, this whole example has been about 5000 BC. So I'm getting the word out this way. I've already told you what is impossible and why it makes it unique. And when you go to the sales page, you'll see That's what makes 5000 BC unique. You will not be stranded. You will get there, you will have a specific question. I'll come back with a whole bunch of answers. You can tag me because technology allows you to do that. And then you might have sub-questions and further questions. And sometimes a post goes for 200 question and answers. And you think, that is just bizarre. Yes, well, that's why we're called Psychotactics. So this brings us to the end of the podcast. And what did we cover in this? We went through 5 steps, which is different from our usual podcast. We usually cover 3 things, but these were 5 steps. The 5 steps were, do you remember them? Okay, let's go. Step 1, list your product or your service. Step 2, what is seemingly impossible for you right now and definitely for your competitors? Step 3, how do you make it possible? Step 4, do an analysis. Can others easily replicate this uniqueness? How much of a honeymoon period are you going to get? Often it's a very long time. And step 5, how do you get the word out? Getting the word out consistently, driving home that uniqueness consistently, that's very, very important. Because when a client makes a decision to buy into your product or service, they need to remember that one thing, not 1,700 things. They need to remember one thing, like with the Pano book, that the blotting paper, they don't have this, but that it has no blotting. And that becomes the one hook that you can remember. So how do you get that word out and how do you repeat that consistently? And possibly on one specific medium or several media, it doesn't matter, but get the word out. And remember that if you say just once, no one is going to recall it. So you have to go at it over and over again. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. What's the one thing that you can do today? Very simple. You list your product or your service and make a list of what's impossible. I'm pretty sure you can do that. You know what's possible. Now make a list of what's impossible. And make a list because you'll have a choice there. And it's very interesting when you make a list. But if you're stuck with just one, that's fine. Go for the impossible, and now you have a uniqueness. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. So what's happening in Psychotactics land? One of the things that really surprises me is that people haven't read the brain audit or haven't read the brain audit several times. And I say this because personally, I'm always upgrading my skills all the time, every single day, except weekends and vacations, of course, but always upgrading my skills. And I recently did a course which had Malcolm Gladwell talking for 26 episodes. So here's what I did. I set a deadline for myself. I said, I'm going to go through these 26 episodes in 2 or 3 days. And I listened to it because, as I said, it was video, but he was just talking, so I could just walk around and listen to it. And I went from one end to the other, not making any notes, not treating it any different than just radio. And then there were notes. There were little summaries that came with the course. And so I downloaded the PDFs and then I made notes based on every single PDF. And here's what I found. I found that I could remember quite a lot because, for one, he didn't cover a lot that I didn't know. There were really good pieces there, like 5 or 6 pieces that I'll cover in the podcast. But I found that I also forgot stuff, and so I had to go back and watch the video again and make notes. And then I had whole videos which were completely useless to me. Not useless, just useless to me, because I already knew that information in great detail. And remember, I went over it the first time and the second time just to make sure. And this is what I suggest with the brain audit. The first time you went through the brain audit, well, it's a book and you're getting that information. It's like crossing a river. But once you've crossed the river, you have a better understanding of how that river is flowing. And especially if you've just crossed the river. If you crossed the river 6 months ago, you know it's a different river. So no matter whether you read the brain audit 2 days ago or 2 years ago, well, I think it's time for you to go over it one more time. And you'll find that it's very interesting. If you make notes, give yourself like a 2-day deadline. On this weekend, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go from end to end, and I'm going to make notes based on the summary, because that's what we do with the Brain Audit. There are nice little summaries at the end of every chapter, and there is a checklist at the end of the book. So you can go over that, and I promise you, you will see it as a different river. And of course, there's a chapter on uniqueness as well, but it doesn't cover uniqueness like this. So now you've got a completely different insight into uniqueness. So when you read that chapter, and if that's the only thing you read, great. So go and read the chapter on uniqueness in the Brain Audit once again. But let's say you want to go deep into this concept of uniqueness and you want to get some goodies, because on May 22nd, we're releasing the Uniqueness Home Study course. And it goes a lot deeper. We spend 2 or 3 days working on uniqueness, how to get to second level uniqueness, how to prevent your competitors from muscling in. So if you want to just get the goodies, you can go to psychotactics.com and go into Home Study, and then there's uniqueness there. But you can also go into Google and type Psychotactics Uniqueness Goodies, 3 words, Psychotactics Uniqueness Goodies. And it should be the first thing that pops up. Click on that. You've got your goodies. You're good to go. And when you join 5000 BC, and I'm assuming that you are going to join 5000 BC, you get to ask your questions. So even if you get stuck somewhere, you've got almost a consulting session. Now, we have lots of other stuff in 5000 BC, including these online meetups that we have where the entire group, not everyone in 5000 BC, but a smaller group meets up. They talk to each other on video, on audio, on chat. You don't have to be on video if you don't like. But the point is, this is a community of introverts, of people who are hardworking, people who know they have to put in the effort. This is not some magic button that you have to press and then, wow, everything happens and you get a 6-figure. No, nothing like that. We don't make those promises because of all the stuff you have to do to get to that point. And that's how you get to that point. And then you focus on, how do I make my life better? How do I get time off? How do I get time to spend with my family? Not just focused entirely on money. So it's a very balanced kind of setup, which is why you should join 5000 BC. So we'll see you in 5000 BC. That's me, Sean D'Souza, saying go out there, read your Brain Audit, read the chapter on uniqueness, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now. Still listening? So I always have this debate with Renuka, because now we're close to 200 episodes on the podcast, and I'm going, there is no way that anyone is following exactly at the same level as I'm putting out the podcast. Because, well, how can you, right? And then I meet our friend Neil. He lives in Dubai. Oh, well, he doesn't live in Dubai anymore. He lives in Germany now. And Neil, you know who you are if you're listening. And he shows up, and I meet him at the cafe, and he says, yep, I'm like 1 episode behind, but that's because I'm on vacation. So I have to create these podcasts because Neil listens to it almost as quickly as I put it out. So there you go. Renuka is right again. I don't know why I even bother. And as you're listening to this podcast, you might not notice the difference, but I am standing up. All of the podcasts, like 190 podcasts, or maybe less, 188. My numbering is all over the place sometimes. But anyway, all the podcasts that we've done so far have been with me sitting down. And last week, I decided to do a whole bunch of podcasts because, we're going away to Italy in April and part of May. And so I had to record a lot of podcasts. And after recording 3 on one day and 3 on another day, my throat started to hurt. It got a bit swollen and my shoulder muscles were hurting because of all the neck muscles pulling on them. So I couldn't record, but then I had to figure out a better way. And what I decided was to go and look on Amazon for this fancy stand. And then I decided, okay, this is not going to work. So I just put some boxes just a whole bunch of boxes and some books. And then we had this rickety thing, because I have a stand-up table, one of those tables where you can just raise it. You can put your computer and raise the table. So I already have that for the computer, but not for the microphone, which is sitting at the side, al lado de la computadora. Anyway, that wasn't there, and so Renuka comes along again. Renuka saves the day, and she gives me these nice little boxes. So instead of 17 things holding up the microphone and all of them rickety, I now have 2 sturdy boxes, and I'm standing up. So this is the first podcast that you've heard with me standing up, and it's so much better because I don't start to hit things and make weird noises and then have to re-record it. So I know that information had no value whatsoever to you, but this is the first one ever. This is the first time for everything, and you have to celebrate, and now it's time for a coffee. And thank you for listening to the podcast. Leave a review on iTunes if you haven't done so, because it helps other people find us, and I get to read a review from you. So thank you, and we'll see you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.